The bigger question past that should be on how does that affect when I am moving that utility that I have seen as an individual and I'm scaling it up to an organization layer? How do I ensure that these skills, and a very important thing that, please excuse me, I have to look at this so that I make sure I'm not telling a lot of stories. One of the most important things that I managed to see was there was a report that was published by MIT, and I think it's called NANDA, the state of AI in businesses. And I think you should be able to look into this. And what they were able to find is that 95% of organizations that were trying to adopt AI within their organizations, through the interviews they did, most of the AI deployment at an organization level ended up failing at one point or the other. And majority of the work that ended up struggling on that was on the, what's it called? The data structure in context management. And very soon I'm going to explain to you the architecture of how LLMs work more broadly for you to be able to understand why context is very important for that. And the company that I had kept on mentioning, Palantir, has come up with this thing called ontology, which is how should you structure your data in a manner that allows AI models to work on them and give you structured output. Because an AI model is a stateless machine. What do I mean by that? Yani assume, for us like as Vascarbon, nimeleta msee kwa kampuni yangu. Ni mwerevu, amepata A, amekula kila kitu, they're very good, and they're first class student, but when they come to your organization, they have zero information about how you do your business, everything around that. And your work is to get them up to speed as much as possible on your organizational history, the way you do things, understanding of the client's problems, so that they can leverage the skills, the competence that I was talking about much earlier to help solve this problem. That's the entire premise around it. And an AI model is very similar to that. So let me try get into the architecture of how an AI model looks like. From the context management, please make sure you look at those videos so that you're able to understand the broader architecture. But for me, the importance around it is to be able to show you the architectural constraints that make an AI model seem like it's doing not so well or so well, depending on how you structure it. So, turudi darasani. These models, when you're chatting, I don't like this color. Your usage of ChatGPT is you type here, who are vast carbon. When I hit enter hapa, you start seeing things show up here. What is actually happening on the background? When you send a prompt, I'll call this message. Input, that's the better word. I'm trying to have consistency in using this. You have something called system instructions. And then user prompt. Here. I will explain all these things. And then you have something called tools. And you have something called let me now try explain this ecosystem. Anytime you're typing who are vast carbon, this is your user prompt. When you press enter, on the background, what these, I use Claude a lot. So let me use Claude as an example for us. What Claude does is, you remember when I was talking about models, and I was telling you models can be designed to allow certain things that are allowable or not. System instructions are things that have been defined by the makers of a model. That says, whenever you ask a question like, who is vast carbon, structure it in this manner, on top of the user prompt. This is how you design the prompt to ensure that you get the best output out of it. If you've used Claude, anytime you've put in an output and you see it saying thinking, if you click on that, you'll start seeing the thought process of how the AI model is working. It will tell you, I'm trying to do XYZ, this is what I'm trying to be able to do, etc. And if you use projects, in Claude. For those of you who have not managed to do it, projects is the ecosystem that allows you to share documents pertaining that specific query that you're working on. So for instance, how do vast carbon develop projects? That could be a user system prompt that they're asking. Or even if you're new in vast carbon and you've been given the job of an associate to do project development, you'd want to understand how vast carbon works. And you ask ChatGPT, your hope is that your user prompt gets paired with a system prompt that tells Claude, anytime a person does this, you're supposed to structure your output like this, do a search on vast carbon, be very clear about it. When you do a search for vast carbon, make sure you go to the website and you do XYZ. And for you to go to the website, there's this thing here called tools. Skill, PDF skill. There are tools that you can give to an AI model that tells it, when they ask you this question, you are allowed to retrieve from knowledge that exists in a folder that vast carbon has designed. Let's say we use OneDrive, for instance. So you're telling, before you answer a person, maybe there are SOPs we have that can help you understand this, and you tell it where this knowledge base is. You tell it it has access to these tools and how to use those tools. All that is contained in the system instruction. So when a person is asking this information and they want to use the internet, you use a tool called web search. Web search has been designed in such a way that it can help you open a website, pass through it, structure data a certain way. You can read all these documentations around it. And then it's on doing all these things, for it to not keep forgetting what you've asked through it as you're chatting with it, it needs to commit some of these things to memory, right? So that's the architecture of, in the background, when you're hitting this send, what is happening. Another thing that needs to be aware of is these models have improved. There's something called context window. And currently, majority of these models have a 1 million token context window. What are tokens? Tokens are just like words. So you see, when I am saying my name is Brian, the most simplistic way to look at it is, this is 1 token, 2, 3, 4. So when I'm saying 1 million tokens, it's almost like the LLM has an ability of accepting up to 1 million words. Realistically speaking, on average, a token is like 0.75 of words. Watch the Andre Kapathy video. I think he does a very deep dive, close to 2 hours, that explains that architecture. I will tell you it's very amazing, the transform architecture. You can read into that. But the idea around it is these models have this as a constraint, which is that so long as you give it up to 1 million words, that's why it can consume even books. It should be able to draw insights out of that. But as it's doing that, there's something called context rot. This is a culprit. Anytime you start working with GPT or Claude and it's doing really well, and then you've told it, when you give me outputs, don't put those dashes. Those GPT-like dashes. You've told it, don't put the GPT-like dashes when you're designing a document for me. It tells you, I understand. And then you work. You've gone through for 1 hour and you've gotten to the end. Remind me to talk about, let me just write this so that I don't forget. Anytime you're talking about that, you start wondering, why is it giving me outputs that have dashes? And then you tell it, but I told you to not put dashes. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. That is my mistake. I will go back. When it gets to that point, your biggest culprit is usually context rot. The memory has been, remember this thing, the memory it has of you and context management is the biggest problem. So please bear with me and just delve down these things, because the moment you understand this, when I explain how I'm linking context to sovereignty, you'll be able to understand. And when I go back to that motorcycle analogy, it becomes much easier for you to be able to do that. So there is this thing that I tried to explain to you in terms of when you're putting information into a chat, what goes in the background. The other thing that goes in is, you see this entire input that has all these 5 elements. Every time you're opening a new ChatGPT page, a new chat, hiyo agent inakuja bila akili. Okay, iko na akili, it comes with akili, but without your context. It does not know you. And if on a personal level you've come to realize something, the more you use GPT, it stores, or Claude, it stores a profile of you, how you like doing things, etc. And every time you load a new chat, what it does is, if you don't do that, and you ask an AI, what do you know about me? It will tell you, I don't know anything. Especially even open projects, and you will see in Claude. So how you do it is, when you come to this context window, again, in my understanding, it gets loaded here. Who you are, what you do, your previous chat history, your user instructions, how you like your documents done as Nyangena, etc. All that context around everything usually gets preloaded within your context window here. And on average, depending on how that looks like, it can be anywhere from 30 to 80K tokens, depending on how deep that is. Because remember, when you're questioning how does Vascarbon do its project, you'll come to an SOP document. It will explain to you how we develop projects, the type of sectoral scopes we handle, how we do client onboarding, what are the processes, how do you bill, there's a lot of information around that, and the AI cannot capture all that. So it has a way of being able to use this. If you've been using GPT or Claude, you get to see at one point it starts saying something like compacting chat. And you see it have like a percentage thing running up all the way, and then it tells you compacted, and it helps you. The reason for that is it's trying to manage the memory bandwidth around it, to prevent context rot. Why is that important? I'll give an example. For those of you who did undergraduate or your PhDs, you are usually supposed to, at the end of the course, you do your research. And most of us will give anywhere between a 70 to 200 page document saying, this is my thesis culminating of my 2 years of learning and everything, ndo hii nimeweka hapa hivi. Then what were you asked to do? Najua hii kitu 300 words. I used to find it like, watu wananichezea, wananipima akili ama nini? How can I do 70 pages of a document and then they tell me summarize your entire research in 300 words? In essence, that's what the AI does when it's compacting your chat. You've kept feeding it information about how you're interacting with it. The number of pages on your research has increased because it cannot remember all 70 pages of it. It does a version of abstraction. Takes your work, compacts it, allows it to free part of this context window, reduces the context rot. Mbona bwana niliwafundisha hizi vitu ndo nikianza kutumia these words, you guys actually have an understanding. It reduces your chances of experiencing context rot, so that the more you're using it, the AI can be able to remember. So there's this entire ecosystem around how well your model knows you is very much going to be very important to help you work on this context window.